It was supposed to be a dream team of economists, those who would propel India to a 10% growth trajectory. That India story coming crashing down to 4.4% in the latest GDP figures. India Inc. is spooked. The markets are investors are fleeing with their money. How did the India story go so horribly wrong? Joining us on the center stage face-off this evening, Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia, Deputy Chairperson of the Planning Commission, one of the Prime Minister's closest advisors and a key member of this dream team, which now seems like India's worst nightmare. Also, to give us a perspective of why India Inc. is so badly spooked, we've got Godrej, Chairperson of Godrej Industries and one of India's leading corporate tycoons. Sunil Alag joins me in the studio. I want to go across first to Montek Singh Ahluwalia. Dr. Ahluwalia, every single economic parameter that could go wrong is going wrong. 4.8 is what the government was saying the GDP figures could come down to. They've come down to 4.4. It almost seems as if this government has lost faith in capitalism and we're going back to a socialist era. You believe that you can't revive the markets, can't revive the economy, so your focus right now is on things like the food security bill, the land acquisition bill, all of which are further spooking out India Inc. Dr. Ahluwalia.
But I don't know whether it's really spooking out India Inc. I think what you're trying to do is to create a scare by a hugely exaggerated negative projection. It's true that the economy is going through a slowdown. We hope that it'll get back up again. Economies don't all stick at one particular growth rate. They do slow down, problems arise. You've got to take a realistic look at what has caused the problems. Some of them are external, some of them are internal, and you've got to correct that. So quite frankly, I think one of the problems we face at the moment is excessive pessimism, gross exaggeration, and no real attempt to analyze what the underlying situation is. I mean, you talked about the food security bill, you talked about land acquisition. I can give you hundreds of people who think that those are very good things to do. So let's ask the question, if you're saying is the growth rate a problem? Absolutely yes, the growth rate is too low. We've said that before. We are going through a slowdown. We're not the only country going through a slowdown, by the way. I mean, there are countries in Europe that are growing at negative growth rates. Virtually every other BRICS country except China is growing very slowly. So we all have problems. The world has a problem. Now to say that as a result, we are anti-India Inc. or that India Inc. is spooked, I think this is a gross exaggeration. But you have India Inc. represented there, and maybe you should ask them.
Yeah. Montek, this is Sunil Alag, I mean the less intellectual of the Alags, but let me just say that when there is excessive pessimism, is it for no reason at all? I agree with you that economies go up and down, and you feel that we need to move together because everything that could be done was being done, and in spite of that the economy is going down. The feeling, and I can tell you, if you look at the 91 figures and if you look at 2013, you're practically in the same current account deficit, you're in the same FDI situation. The only improvement which you can say is your foreign exchange reserves was 14 days in 91, it's about 6 months now. Otherwise everything is identical. For the first time in the last 18 months, we haven't seen a single measure being taken by the government, and we can blame the parliament that BJP hasn't allowed you all to operate and X has not happened. The average industrialist is moving out, and I'd like Adi to come in, because they have no confidence left that this government means business. The executive people have given up their authority, it's all gone to the judiciary. On top of that, when you do not have the money, you bring in this land reform, you bring in the question of food security. Nobody wants to argue that we need to feed the poor. Nobody wants to argue about the fact that no farmer should be, we should exploit them. But when you don't have the money, you decide to feed 70% of India's population. I mean, even I gave an example earlier. Even if I'm a parent and I tell my child, when the child is about 6 or 7 years old, look, when you become 15, I'll send you abroad. I have a job when I'm 7 years old, when she's 7 or he's 7, and then at the age of 15 I lose my job. What will you tell your child? Hang on for a year, I'm getting another job, I'll send you next year. No way. The government has decided, the political system is getting ready for elections. As Sonia Gandhi said, I don't care where the money comes from, I'm going to do this.
You've raised several questions,
There is no plan of revenue generation. There's a huge plan for expenditure which is bringing about this excessive pessimism, and that's all that we want to know. Where is the plan to take care of these expenses? It's not only 20,000 crores, it's without any expiry date.
Okay.
It's going to be about 600,000.
Let Dr. Ahluwalia answer all those questions.
Is the timing right for what you are doing? That's all.
You've said a large number of things, and it's not easy to know which one to pick on. So let me just make a few disconnected statements. The first issue is, let's talk about the food security bill. I know that a lot of people in industry don't like it, but the honest truth is that it's not as if the food security bill has produced a completely new demand that wasn't there earlier. I mean, we have a PDS. It's being somewhat expanded. The numbers have been increased. The prices have been lowered, but therefore the quantity that's being given has also been reduced. So frankly, I would say that if you're worried about expenses, the most important thing that the government has said is what the finance minister said about the fiscal deficit. Now, he said, I am going to regard the 4.8% fiscal deficit as a red line that I won't cross, and he knew that the food security bill was being passed, and I don't think that it's difficult to accommodate the additional requirements of the food security bill within the fiscal deficit. Now, that's a very categorical statement by the government. So if you fear that money is going to be printed, the government has quite clearly said no. Now, as far as the land bill is concerned, this has been discussed for 2 years. There is a huge demand. There's a widespread perception that the earlier bill, the earlier legislative arrangement was not very fair, because it didn't give totally fair compensation to those whose land was taken. This has been known for 2 years, so I don't think India Inc. is surprised that the land reform bill has gone through. Somebody made a statement earlier that in the last 18 months the government has done nothing. Let me say, by the way, it is not the government's view that everything is fine. It is not the government's view that everything depends on India Inc. to get the growth story up. I mean, we recognize that there is a job to be done, and we recognize that the government has a big responsibility in setting things right. What have we done? Well, I think that in the last 6 months or so, one of the big problems that we are trying to focus on is to get rid of the impediments that were preventing infrastructure projects from moving ahead. That's why we set up the Cabinet Committee on Investment that was set up sometime in January. Now, since then, that committee has taken a very large number of decisions. So let me just take a few minutes to tell your readers what has been done, and then they can decide whether nothing has been done. And first of all, a number of large projects that were not getting environmental and forest clearances have got them. Something like 25 oil exploration and gas exploration projects that were held up for security clearances have got their clearances. About 78,000 megawatts of generating capacity that had come on, that being set up, and that would have been operational by April of 2015, but didn't have a fuel supply linkage. They now have that. That's 78,000 megawatts worth of plant. We've given them a combination of domestic and imported coal. They know the coal is going to be available, so they don't have to worry about fuel supply.
Okay, let me bring in Mr. Godrej.
Some very important,
because you're putting out a whole list.
Because I'm telling you things. No, you have
of accomplishments.
To let me finish.
Yes, okay, go on, Dr.
The government has clarified a number of issues relating to linear projects where environmental clearances have been simplified, and now since you want to get on with it, I'll stop. It's just not true that nothing has happened. And by the way, that doesn't include many of the tax-related simplifications and clarifications that the government has brought in. The Finance Ministry has announced. Large numbers of people, for example, in the area of contract research were concerned about transfer pricing. Those guidelines have been clarified. So I think a lot of problems are being addressed. I think it's true that Indian investors are still a bit depressed.
No, because if you see Mr. Godrej's face, he's looking very depressed at this time, Dr. Ahluwalia. He's not seeming very enthused or confident after hearing you list out those slew of accomplishments. Dr. Ahluwalia argues, Mr. Godrej, that the government is serious, it is moving fast, and that investors have no reason to be apprehensive. Why then is there so much gloom and doom in corporate India? Dr. Ahluwalia is arguing that the pessimism is exaggerated. The problem is not as widespread as is being made out to be. What are your principal concerns that you think Dr. Ahluwalia and others in government are not answering? Mr. Godrej.